All right, so just to put a cap on it, caste clarifies the legal, social, religious. It's basically just the things that we do, right? I mean, arguably these are all social. If we talk about scripture is a human activity, remember that? These are all human activities, right? Legal activities are human activities, social activities are human activities, and of course then religious would be too. The ways in which caste was created and is still maintained. So that's the big takeaway, right? That's what these pillars of caste are, is how do you make a caste system? It sounds like a weird question, but once we decide or once we recognize that caste is a human invention, this is something we do, we impose on other people and impose on ourselves, right? We create for our own society. There's actually a lot that we can do there. And so these pillars of caste are pointing out the ways that that happens, the ways that these ideas of, for example, purity and pollution are created. Actually, Wilkerson wrote a ton about that, and we didn't have enough time to discuss every detail. That was the longest part of the reading that we saw, probably about half of it. And one thing that I asked you all is caste versus race, caste versus class, right? That's another big takeaway. Class should be pretty clear. I think you guys know what class is. We often kind of pretend like class is the only operating hierarchy in America, right? There's high classes, middle classes, low class. We're all middle class, right? Everybody says they're middle class, even though they're actually very rich or even kind of poor, right? Everybody says, oh yeah, I'm just middle class. And so, but unlike race and racism, which is this really loaded word, you know, you don't want to call somebody racist. People do on the internet, and then other people say, no, I'm not racist, you're racist, right? I don't see color or whatever, right? Racism doesn't apply to me. I'm sure you've seen these sorts of conversations before. Caste is a little less direct, right? The way that Isabel Wilkerson writes about it, it's not you're racist because you're evil, or I'm racist because I'm a white boy or whatever. It's more like, here's this thing that we all do, and we are all a part of it. It's not some individual sin that somebody needs to take a shower and wash out their mouth with soap so they can stop being so damn racist all the time. I mean, that is a thing that happens, but this is bigger, right? This is more general, it's more broad. We are all a part of the caste system, according to Wilkerson. And it's clearly created, maintained by individuals. We are each individually a part of it. We're each individually responsible for making it. And groups of people, right? And so we can look at history and the way that historical individuals maintain the caste system. And we can look at the present and think about the ways that we might engage in or promote this caste system, or the reverse, right? Try to dismantle it by understanding these pillars of caste. But again, I think there's less guilt, right? With racism, there's a lot of guilt. You're bad, so you're racist. So quit being so racist and you'll stop being so bad, right? This, I think there's, and again, it's because Wilkerson is such a careful writer. She shows the horrors of caste, and indeed it is horrible. I hope that is one takeaway. I kind of took it down a notch in class, but if you read carefully, horrible atrocities were being committed in the name of caste. I think, again, if you read carefully, you know what I'm talking about. So she's not trying to like lighten it or anything. In fact, she's bringing you into the guts of this horrible system, but then at the same time explain how it hasn't totally disappeared and how we are still part of it, right? Echoes of this caste system still exist today. So those are takeaways I wanted you guys to have. Hopefully that's mostly review at this point. Any last thoughts or questions about caste? Anything you guys want to ask about or talk about? So like I said, exam is coming up in a few weeks. This, of course, will be on it. We spent a whole week on it. You guys did a writing assignment on it. So if you feel unclear or unsure about what these pillars of caste mean or any of this sort of stuff, let me know and we can go over it. Okay, going once, going twice. Sold? That hand, Lauren? Okay, so Lauren's saying, hey, what sort of questions will be on the exam? Is that what you're asking? Yeah, so there'll be two kinds of questions. It's a great question. And this will be on the review sheet. I'll spell it all out for you. But since you're asking now, there'll be two kinds of questions. One is more general and analytical. It'll be a lot like these forum posts, right? I'll give you some big idea question. It'll be a lot like the questions we talk about in class, right? So if you've been coming to class, paying attention in class, engaging in these conversations, then you will be better prepared to answer those questions on the exam. It'll all be online because most of the class is online. And well, actually, half the class is online. And the one thing you'll see when I spell all this out is I expect the people registered in person to come in person. And the reason for that is if there's some problem, there's a Moodle crash, there's a Moodle issue, we can resolve that problem while we're here together. So, there are 2 people in the classroom now. Everybody who's registered in person, I expect you to come unless you have COVID reasons or whatever. If you are healthy and able, please come to class. Again, I'll put this all in writing. So it'll be timed, right? It'll be over Moodle, it'll be timed. And so it'll be open book, it'll be open note. You can look things up. So I could ask you very specific questions, but I don't expect you to memorize stuff. That's not really part of the process because it's open note, you know what I mean? But these big interpretive questions will certainly be part of it. And I'll give you quotations, right? So, when you wrote these forum posts, I asked you to have specific quotations, and it doesn't mean you need to memorize all the quotations from the slides, but you do need to know, for example, this book we're going to read. You need to know the general story. If I give you something about Jim Crow or purity and pollution, then you'll know it's coming from Wilkerson, right? So I will ask you specific questions about quotations. So identifying them and explaining them. I'll give you a quotation, I won't tell you where it's from, and I'll ask you to explain what it's all about. So those are the 2 kinds of questions. The more specific, like, did you do the reading and did you understand it? Do you remember the story from this? Do you remember the ideas from today? So obviously you can look these things up, but you have limited time. So part of it will be time management. But memorization is not going to be a big part of this exam. Because again, open note, open book. So good question. Does that make sense? Other questions? Okay, so let's keep going. So yeah, just to sort of put a cap on that, I could ask you what are the pillars of caste, for example, but that wouldn't be a very good question because you can look it up in your notes, right? But if I asked you to analyze them, like explain the role of purity and pollution in the creation of caste, that would be a better question because then you have to know what that is, you have to know what purity is, you have to know what pollution is. You could look up the answer to that, but it would take the entire exam period. And so you'll have to just be familiar with this concept, right? Okay, let's keep going. The aims of life. So we're taking it in a new direction. This is another Wendy Doniger reading. So she has been kind of in the background for a lot of our class. She's really a top-notch scholar when it comes to Hinduism. So she did translations that we've read. She did the double vision analysis piece. And now we've got this aims of life piece. The 3, or is it 4 aims of life in the Hindu imaginary. What did you guys think about this chapter? Was this hard to read or was this interesting? Okay, so Lauren found it pretty straightforward. Some parts are confusing. And as I was reading it again, I felt the same way. I was like, she uses a lot of Sanskrit words and there are a lot of lists here. And she references a lot of books that maybe you guys don't know. So yeah, if you feel like you didn't get every detail, especially for Doniger stuff, that's okay, right? Because she is this really high level Hinduism scholar. But I think this idea of the 3 aims of life will be very useful for us. So this is the main takeaways. What are the 3 aims of life? Here they are for you. We've got duty, success, pleasure, dharma, artha, kama. And there are different ways to translate these terms, right? As you can see, dharma, artha, kama, these are Sanskrit words. Doniger translates them as duty, success, pleasure. She also gives a bunch of other synonyms. So for dharma, we can think about duty or society or piety. For success, domination, success, profit, or for pleasure, desire, sex, pleasure. So different ways to translate these terms. This is one way to think about foreign language words is they can kind of have a few different synonyms hanging on them, right? They might be a little bigger than an English word, encompass more meaning. It might be a little more specific sometimes, right? And it encompass less meaning. If you only remember duty, success, pleasure, that would be fine. Again, it's open note for the exam, so you don't have to worry about that too much. But yeah, my goal is not to test your Sanskrit. It's more to test the ideas for you. So we've got these aims of life. Um, Maybe more generally, we can think. I mean, this is a very meta question. I don't know if it's even interesting for you guys to think about, but what's the point of it all, right? Do you guys ever think about this stuff? Like, why go to class? Why do the things that we do, right? Why sign into the Zoom room? Do you guys ever think about this? Say no? Yeah? Yeah? Okay. 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 Good. So if you guys can hear, Lauren's saying we paid for school, and so we didn't come to class. That'd be sort of a waste of money. And she also mentioned job, right? And so that maybe at the end of the day, she's trying to get a job. That makes sense to me. Caitlin, do you have more? You nodded your head too. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when it's snowing outside, when we got to wear these damn masks all the time, right? There are a lot of reasons to not come to class, right? There are a lot of reasons to just sort of lie in bed all day. And, there's a name for that when you lie in bed all day, right? So just like Caitlin is saying, this question of motivation, right? Somehow thinking about these aims of life, thinking about the purpose of it all, the reason you're doing it, will help you get out of bed in the morning, right? Because you remember, oh yeah, there is a point to all this, right? There is a point. And in fact, there could be many points. So chat, you guys want to chime in? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? %, agree with Lauren, says yeah. Okay. If we had to classify this idea of, I paid for this and I'm trying to get a job at the end of the day, which of the three would you, my alarm is loud. Okay. But who set the alarm, Daniel? That's the real question. Who set the alarm? Maybe it was Daniel last night, and Daniel in the morning doesn't appreciate Daniel last night. But yeah, coming back to this idea of paying for things and getting jobs, which one of these three would you pick? The duty, success, or pleasure? Yeah, so you described like a feeling of, you paid for this, you're trying to get a job, trying to get good grades so you can get a job, right? And I think a lot of people agree with that, right? Yaya said she agrees 100%. Nia says because she went through 12 years of school for this, so I might as well finish it off. We're lucky some people can't get out of bed in the morning. Oh, we are lucky, maybe period. We are lucky because there are some people who can't get out of bed in the morning, if I understand what you're saying. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, some people can't get out of bed in the morning. And so this is a major conversation. And I pointed at it a moment ago that there's a name for that. What we're dancing around is depression, right? I mean, there are other ways that people cannot get out of bed in the morning. But this is real, right? I mean, this is a real struggle for all of us. Again, particularly now. I don't know why. I couldn't give you a very clear explanation for why it is, but I think during COVID, it's particularly hard to find the point, to find the energy in it all, right? I've worked before class.
It's because we're not meant for isolation.
We're not meant for isolation?
Like, we're not meant to deal with isolation.
Yeah.
And a lot of COVID quarantine.
Humans are social creatures. Well, and so that's a good reason to come to class, is we can come socialize. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I kind of like coming to class, even though you got to wear masks and you got the screen and it's sort of annoying and all these things, right? Without it, life is so much more quiet and so much more screen time, right? We're going to be doing it anyway, right? Staring at a screen or talking to each other. That's the choice. All three: duty to combine society, success to make money, pleasure to eventually retire, and chill. So Max is saying all three are coming out here. Okay, so I like that we're steering it back in the direction of these three things. So we can begin to think, what are these? They're labels, right? They're labels that we can apply to these different motivations. So maybe you have a sense of why you do things, but you haven't necessarily put these labels on them. And I'm going to argue that these are actually very useful labels, which is why I'm introducing them to you today. Now, if I were going to do this exercise, the idea of getting a job, right? I think that's something that's probably floating around for a lot of you. I know it's early. This is your first or second year for a lot of you. Maybe some of you guys transferred in, and so you're third or fourth year students. But at some point, you're going to be thinking about jobs, right? At some point, there's the job looming over your head. You're picking your major right now, thinking about what your job is going to be, right? Sort of in the background. So what is this job? If you had to pick one, where does the job fit in? Is that duty, success, or pleasure? Finding the job. And like Max said, there's kind of all three a little bit. Yaya says success. Why do you say success, Yaya?
Because I feel like a lot of people associate success with like money.
Yeah.
And what do you get when you work? You get money. So I feel like that's what people find successful, is like having a lot of money, or I mean, I do agree that it has some sort of like duty as well, because like I feel like sometimes morally when you're unemployed, at least for me, I got laid off from my job, and being unemployed at the moment, I kind of feel like, what's my purpose type? Like, yeah, I'm going to school and it's great, and I'm thankful for that, but sometimes I feel like it's almost like my duty that I should be working and contributing to society, but then I would say it mostly lands under Artha.
Okay. So that's a wonderful explanation. Thank you, Yaya. So it can be combined, right? Just like Max was saying, in general, why do you go to work? Why do people try to get a job? Is to make some money, right? Why do you make some money? Well, as you can see here, there's a sense of domination, success, profit, right? It doesn't have to only be about money, but a lot of it is, particularly on our society. There's a sense that money is power. Maybe you want to be independent, right? Have a little money in the pocket so you can change jobs, if you can get out of a bad situation, if you find yourself in one, right? There are all sorts of reasons that we need money in this world. So absolutely, success is a big one. I like the way Yaya was talking about duty as this sort of social concern. Again, duty, society, piety. So this is something, again, we're going to think about a little bit more, is what does it mean to follow your duty? We saw a little bit of it in the Tevye the Dairyman reading, remember that? What part of that said duty to you guys? Oh, that's what we're doing, Maya, don't worry. We're defining success. But yeah, so what
Can I add something to what Yaya said?
Please, go ahead, Smoke.
That a lot of like what she was talking about like, for example, getting like laid off work, or that things like that. It's because I feel like when we don't, like, we have this need to be productive, because a lot of like productivity, it's kind of like it feels like a lot of your self-worth comes from productivity. So a lot of things like being hardworking, those are like, it's like a compliment, and it's seen as like this. I mean, it's complimented way more. It's like, because we can get more if we're hardworking, basically. And this like sense of not being productivity comes a lot with guilt. Like I took a gap year, and when I did, I just felt very guilty, and I took it for my mental health, but I felt very guilty still.
Yeah.
And it's odd, because it's like, even when I took my gap year, I still felt like the need to look for a job and those kind of things.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simone. So
to at least do something,
You're touching on an important part of our society, right? This idea of being productive. Do you ever talk to each other about being productive? How was your weekend? Was it productive? Were you productive at the library today? I remember when I was a young student, people would talk to me that way, and I would be like, "Get out of my face!" I really kind of hated that idea. I hated that word, being productive, and I think for reasons that Simone is talking about, right? Is it's really, this is my analysis of it. I've thought about this a lot. I've thought about this many times. Really, what is being productive is taking success, this idea of doing, succeeding in life, beating other people, getting the job, getting the prize, but it's also combining it with duty and even with pleasure. It's sticking them all together, right, into one kind of messy jumble where it's like, if you're not constantly working, you can never enjoy your life, right? And so what we're going to do in this class is actually separate these out a little bit. And I'm going to give you tools to rethink these different motivations. So Mario asked me to define success. And in some ways, that's the exact point, right? That's exactly what we're trying to do today, is to pry these apart and think about how they relate to each other. Because like Simone was saying, we live in a world where these are very much jumbled together. We could explain how that happened and look at history and so forth. I don't think we need to do that. But the fact of the matter is, much of our, I can't speak for you guys, but for me, much of my pleasure comes from my success. Much of my success rests on what I feel like I have to do, on my duty to society as a teacher, a researcher, whatever. And as a result, it's hard to take a goddamn break. I got a shot in the arm yesterday. I got my vaccine shot. And that's when I finally was like, you know what? I'm not going to do any research tonight because my body is aching and I feel terrible, right? So it's like, I'm going to watch a movie. That was maybe the first time I've like just been lying in bed watching a movie in a very long time, right? Even during the pandemic, lots of work, mountains of it, right? So in any case, this is actually, I would argue, very relevant, very important for our society now. And so that's why we're going to try to pry them apart and think about them. Other thoughts, other questions about this? Shall we dive in? All right, so duty, what's the deal with duty? Duty is actually very tied up with the caste system. So that's why we started with the caste system before we got to this. We could have done it the other way around, and that would also be fine. But I guess maybe I'll read this to you first, and I want you to think, what does this have to do with the caste system? So I'm going to ask you that question in a moment, so start thinking about it. Dharma includes duty, religion, religious merit, morality, social and ritual obligations. You can see I've got the Brahmins performing a sacrifice ritual here, right? The law and justice. Dharma holds the universe together. A scam call. Okay, get out of here. Dharma holds the universe together. Dharma, rather than love, is what makes the world go round. Dharma is both the way things are and the way they should be. I think that's really key. So in this sense, it's actually very similar to the word law, right? There are scientific laws which describe the way things are, and then there are laws that we are supposed to follow, right? The way things should be. We're going to call it duty, but as this paragraph shows, this is a big concept. The word dharma holds so much behind it. It's kind of outrageous, but we're going to focus on really these specific duty aspects of it. So again, where does duty come in this whole caste system thing? Can you guys make sense of this? Where does duty connect to the caste system? Exactly. So a caste is what a caste does in a lot of ways, right? And so if I'm born into the Brahmin caste, what is my duty? Perform rituals. Yeah, we think about what do Hindus do? That's exactly right. So this is the specific task for the Brahmins. Nobody else can do it. And maybe you can see there's a circular logic here. Do you see the circular logic? Brahmins perform the rituals because they're Brahmins. And they are Brahmins because they perform the rituals, right? There's nothing inherently special about these people, right? These are just things that we assign to them, as we saw before when we talked about the caste system. This is a social construct, right? But because they do the rituals, they are the Brahmins, and they are the Brahmins because they do the rituals, and so on and so on. So other tasks for other castes, the second caste, the Kshatriya, they're the rulers and the noble people, nobility, aristocracy. They make the rules, they enforce the rules, they often commit acts of violence, right, which makes them lower down in the caste system. And below them are the merchants and the farmers and so forth. Below them are the servants. Below them are the outcasts, right? So I think you can see it, right? This idea of duty is actually totally tied up with the caste system. Any questions about that? Does that make sense? All right.
Sorry, can you repeat the last part about duty and the caste system, the very last part?
Sure. And in fact, I've got it written out right here. I should have jumped to the next slide. So yeah, so Brahmins do the rituals. You know, what you can be thinking, what is the duty of the Brahmin? What is their duty for society, is to perform these rituals? What is the duty of the kings and warriors? They create the laws, they enforce the laws, they protect the order of society, they protect the people in society, they fight the wars against the bad people, all that sort of stuff. Merchants and farmers, production and commerce, servants do the labor. So again, this is just taking what we saw before in the caste system and then analyzing it from this aspect of what do these people do, right, to sort of define their roles in the caste system. There are other duties too, though. So I don't think I actually have this on a slide. Maybe I won't mention it then. So let's just focus on this. There are these different stages of life where the duty of the student is to study, right? So if we compare your guys' lives to the old days, you actually have it a bit more complicated. You know, when I hear you talking about you feel this pressure to work and to make money, it breaks my heart a little bit because again, this is sort of an ideal situation and not all of us live in ideal situations, but students should study. That's your duty, right? You don't need to be making stuff. You don't know how to make stuff, right? And theoretically speaking, obviously you guys are adults and you do know how to make stuff. But at the same time, your primary responsibility, I would argue, is really to study. And then if you add work on top of study, in my mind, there are three things you can do, and a lot of it comes back to this duty, success, pleasure kind of thing. You know, what do you lose is the pleasure, right? You don't have any time to hang out. Now, of course, we live in a pandemic, and so there's not a lot of fun things to do anymore. But still, you know, if your whole life is just studying and working, to me, there's something missing there. Now, you could be having fun as you're studying and having fun as you're working. We'll talk about that too. But the old days, the responsibility of the student is to study. And this is mostly talking about men. I mean, we've talked about many of the horrors of the caste system, how people have been abused under its auspices. It's also a patriarchy, right? So most students going to study would be men. I'm sure there are exceptions to that, women who can read and write, but not a lot, not in the old days at least. And so they would also be expected to be chaste. I don't know if you saw that in the reading, but they'd be expected to abstain from sex. So why is that? Because if you have sex, you might have kids. And if you have kids, you can't really study anymore. I don't know if any of you guys have kids, but it's hard to study when you have kids. You can do it, but it's hard to do. Eventually, you do have kids, though. You care for your family. So that's sort of this new duty that comes along. Eventually, you can retire. So maybe you have grandkids by this point, right? And your children are sort of taking care of the house. They're taking care of you. You can retire, sort of hang out, give people advice. And then finally, and this one usually, you know, those other three might be kind of familiar, but that last one is probably not so familiar. You prepare to die, which is, you know, rather than like dying slumped over on your desk because all you're thinking about is work, this is taking death really seriously, right? And thinking, I'm probably going to die in the next few years. I'm going to cut off my attachments to society, maybe even move out of the house, maybe even move away, and really focus on spiritual practice. Because of course, this is a world where you're reborn, right? And so that is time well spent, is preparing for the next life. And then finally, there's a universal dharma. The very end of the reading talked about that, which maybe it's a term you've heard before, ahimsa. This will not be on the exam, but it's a nice word you might hear from yoga class or something. It's about nonviolence or even anti-violence. And so there is this sense that violence is bad, violence is impure, lower figures in the caste system commit violence, higher figures do not, right? Higher figures abstain from violence. So violence is bad, but that doesn't mean Indian society was not violent, right? I think that's a point that Doniger makes pretty clearly, is that people who pursue violence try to figure out ways to kind of make up for it, right? If your job is to kill things, then you might make offerings from the money that you make so you don't have a bad next life, something like that. So this is just another extension of duty, right? To give you a sense of what is duty. It's social responsibility. It's doing what you're supposed to do in line with your caste, in line with your stage of life, right? And so I think you guys had a pretty good understanding of what it is. Within the patriarchal system, it's listening to your parents. If you're a woman, it's listening to your husband. If you're the husband, it's controlling yourself, and if you're Brahmin, doing the rituals and staying in line with the scriptures and all that sort of thing. We'll see more of this in the Ramayana too. So if you're not totally clear on Dharma, again, we'll see more of this. So this is duty. Questions about duty? Pretty good. All right, we're gonna go through the other two real quick, and then I'm gonna turn it over to you. How much time we got? 1:20? Yeah, so we got a half hour. That's good. Artha. So what is Artha? Artha is money, political power, success. It can also be translated as goal or aim in the three aims of life, right? So these are the three goals of life, we could call them. Gain versus loss, money, the meaning of a word, the purpose of something. There's a whole book called the Arthashastra. This is sort of a loaded sentence. I wonder if you guys can understand it. It makes Machiavelli look like Mother Teresa. Machiavelli, yeah. Who's Machiavelli? Bad guy. He wrote a very famous book. Anybody? Machiavelli, very famous book. Anybody Googling him right now? The Prince. So he's, I want to say 14th century. I haven't looked this up recently. I kind of forget. But he's like early Renaissance kind of figure. And he, like Lauren is saying, he's kind of this bad guy. His whole thing is the ends justify the means. What does that mean? The ends justify the means. Have you heard that phrase before?
Yeah, like it's fine if you do something that's not all right, like it's not ethical, as long as it has a good result. So it's like, let's say if we can make people suffer from doing different things, as long as it's going to make money,
Yeah, exactly. Lauren, is that about what you were going to say, Tim? Yeah. And so if we think about this, what would the ends be in this case? That would be success, right? If you get some sort of money, if you get some sort of profit, then even if you have to lie or cheat or steal or do something that's a little unethical in order to get it, then that's okay, right? And like Lauren's saying, Machiavelli has gotten this reputation for being kind of ruthless, right? Unethical, immoral, power hungry. And so his name has become an adjective. You could say Machiavellian, which just means the same sort of mentality, right? The ends justify the means. Mother Teresa, you guys know who she is? Charity work. Yeah, actually in India. So it's sort of an interesting reference here. She's a saint. She's recognized as a saint, I think, relatively recently, last, I don't know, a few years. But yeah, charity work in India, Catholic Church. And so to say that the Arthashastra makes Machiavelli look like Mother Teresa is to say this is a ruthless book, right? Talking about getting people murdered, tricking people, fooling people, stealing from people. We're not going to read it. I thought about teaching it in this class, but I couldn't find a really good part. It's too thick. It's too difficult. So we're going to look for success in this book. Questions about success? Mario, is that relatively clear? Did Mario ask about this? I can't even see the comment. Oh yeah, there it is. Mario asked about it. Yeah. All right, so there's success. Finally, pleasure. Here's another book I thought about assigning to you guys. It ignores biology. Oh, let's take a step back. How does it ignore biology, Mario? Could you say more about biological success? Are you thinking like Darwin? Is that what you're thinking about? All right, well, as he is typing, let us move, I guess so. Okay, well, survival of the fittest, maybe that's what Mario's trying to get at. So there are some species that are more successful, right? Some species go extinct and others do not go extinct. And of course, Darwin lived much later than this period, but I think we could find something similar, right? It's winning the game, right? If we take evolution as a game and talk about some species win that game and some species lose that game, I think it maps on. We just have to be a little more interpret it a little more widely, right? Here's a very provocative image. It's from Penguin Classics, so I thought it would be appropriate for class. But if you look carefully, these shadows are doing some pretty funky things. And so this is the last book we're going to talk about. It's called the Kama Sutra. Have you guys heard of the Kama Sutra? It's kind of not safe for work, so don't Google it now, but you can Google it when you go home if you want. It basically has got this reputation as a sex manual. Your parents probably have heard of this. It was very popular, like, I don't know, 40 or 50 years ago when people were a little more square, and then the Kama Sutra comes out and they're like, whoa, what the hell is this book? What is this book doing? But it's not only a sex manual, right? It's a guide to love, family, human relationships, other aspects of pleasure in life. So it goes to show, right, that there's much more to pleasure than just sex. And this explores all of the different pleasures that might be around sex and love and relationships and all that sort of fun stuff. All right, Mario got back to it. Like success is doing things to help spread your genome and your family's genome, like surviving. I guess this ties into material value and also because material wealth translates to survival. So Mario's thinking like, who gets like the best mate or something like that, right? And again, if we think about tying these together, maybe he's thinking about putting success and pleasure together, right? So in the old days in ancient India, those would be very different pursuits. Obviously, we'll see this in this book here, actually, where sort of like, what's his name? Robin Hood and Maid Marian, they have like the archery contest. You guys know what I'm talking about? Disney Robin Hood? You've never seen Disney Robin Hood with the fox and this? Oh, you guys got to watch that. All right, anyways. There's a sense of you got to like win the game to win the fair maiden and that sort of thing. But there's also quite a bit of separation between success and pleasure in this book. No, not really. I just mean like going for money or fame is different than going for success. I don't really agree with you, Mario. Give me an example that is not just winning the game, right? Winning the beautiful woman. Okay, so the pleasures of having a family? Fulfillment as a form of success? Okay, well, and I like this conversation because again, we tend to tie these things together, right? And so I think something is tied together in Mario's mind that he's saying it doesn't really fit these categories, and that's good, right? That's good. Maybe there's sort of some combination of these three. Again, if we take a happy family, for example, according to this system, we might call it success in modern English or whatever, but according to this system, that'd be really more pleasure. To have a nice, and again, this is patriarchal, have a nice wife, have some children, that's happy life, right? And to not have that is a little bit torturous, right? It's a little bit unhappy. And so it's not really seen as like a game you have to win most of the time, although again, that does show up here. Sometimes they do overlap. Most of the time, the whole realm of sex and marriage and relationships, all of that falls in the pleasure category, which might feel uncomfortable, right? Because we like to say pleasure is about getting drunk, or having sex, or these very limited activities, whereas this is saying, actually, a friendship is pleasurable. We often don't think about that, right? It's redefining these categories. Let me see. Not really mean you cannot have a lot of material wealth, but you have someone who makes you happy, you survive, and that's biological success. So Mario's saying pleasure is success, and I'm saying call it whatever you want, but according to this system, that would be pleasure. Does that make sense? And again, I think this highlights Simone's point to begin with, is that we tie up pleasure, success, duty, all of these things sort of come together. Okay, well, I don't want to argue with you, bro, but what I'm saying is according to these scriptures, right, what you just described falls into the categories of family, human relationships, and other acts of pleasure in life. Pleasure just to read. So yeah. All right. So Mario, remember double vision, bro. Expand your mind. You don't have to hold on so tightly to biology class and religion class, right? We can have two lobes. Remember the two lobes? Don't forget the other lobe. Okay, let's keep going. So now is time, and Mario, I appreciate your energy though. So please argue with your classmates about this because I do like that you're engaging with it. Now I'm going to give you some things to talk about. And again, Mario's example is a very good one. Here, I'll give you the link here. I think you should be able to access this. I don't know. I might not have looked at the settings. So let me know if you can't access it. So here we've got just 8 kind of random things that I picked out. And what I want you to do is talk about duty, success, and pleasure across these different categories. So Mario and I were just going back and forth about marriage. And so what I want you to decide is, where to go? Here it is. What do we do when they come into conflict with each other? What about when one is more important than the other? So what I want you to do is to kind of rank them. Which one's most important, second most important, least important, and what is missing? Is something missing from here? Because again, coming back to Mario's point, this does not necessarily capture every aspect of human life, right? So what is missing? I think particularly faith. I put that one in there to confuse you a little bit. It doesn't quite work. So what's going on with that one too? So I want you to go through this, talk about it with your classmates, maybe take 2 or 3 minutes to just fill it out. You can download the document and fill it out on your own, or you can copy and paste it and fill it out on some other program. Leave it up to you. I guess I can try to dump it in the chat. Let's see, is that gonna work? It does work, yeah. All right, at least half of them are there. No, they're all there. Yeah. So anyways, please fill this out. Ranking, duty, success, pleasure, which one is most important? And then I will give you some time to talk about it. How's that sound? Questions?
So wait, I got a quick question. So we can only choose.
What you talked about? Were any of the questions like particularly interesting or difficult or challenging or anything?
The one with.
Oh, sorry.
You can go first.
No, it's okay. You go first.
I said we haven't heard from you today. Go ahead, please.
So in my group, one thing that we did discuss was marriage and which one was more important, whether it was duty or pleasure, because when you go into marriage, you're making a vow, so you have to keep at it. And I argued that wouldn't it be pleasure? Because if you're not happy in a marriage, then why should you stay? And etc. And we also argued, didn't argue. We also discussed eating and pleasure and success and duty in eating.
And what was most important for eating?
For me, it was pleasure.
What else could it be, right? So eating definitely brings us pleasure, right? If you guys ever met anybody like a foodie, or any of you guys foodie? I'll write it in the chat. Foodies?
Yes.
So I think for a foodie, right, eating is like pleasure for sure. Maybe you could even tie in some success or something like that in there. But what other motivations drive eating? Are there did anybody come up with anything else?
Wouldn't it be a duty? Don't you have to like eat in order to live? Well, I mean, I don't know. It's like for your health and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say how to put this. So let's say you're a parent and you're trying to just take care of your kids and you don't see eating as this like this really pleasurable activity as much as this thing you need to do to take care of your kids and make sure that they eat and you eat, but like them eating is even more important than you. Have you ever seen this situation before? Like if food is short, maybe mom and dad give extra food to the kids. It's always heartbreaking to see, but at those times, eating is not for pleasure. In fact, it's kind of the opposite, right? It's like you are sacrificing your pleasure so that other people can eat. Have you guys ever seen or experienced something like this before? Yeah.
I mean, luckily not experienced, but
well,
for sure.
Even like in a Chinese restaurant where you're all sharing the same dishes, right? There are ways to be polite. You know, obviously you're enjoying it together, but the question of pleasure extends more beyond like what sensation am I enjoying right now? Good. Okay. Other things we still got a few minutes, and we can finish this conversation next time.
Going back to the marriage thing,
Sure.
when we were talking with our group, we said it was like, well, I can basically say we said it was a mix of all three. And going back to like it being like a duty, it's like, let's say you're in a marriage and you have kids, right? But if you're not happy, it's like it's more of a duty like to keep like the family together that causes you to stay in that marriage, you know?
Mhm.
So it wouldn't be like you're more focused on like, you know, making your family successful and keeping your family together. That makes you it become more of a duty rather than like pleasure or success. But we also said that success can play a role in it because sometimes we choose based on like our goals in life, or like we approach someone based on like our aspects in life, you know.
Sure. Yeah, you could be a power couple. I don't know if any of you
Mhm.
guys are power couples, but I would say that would be like a successful relationship, right? People come together to empower each other. Absolutely. Yeah. And so the example you gave, Jessica, was perfect. We live in a society where, you know, there are more and more divorces, right? And so this is a conversation. Is sometimes people get married, sometimes people fall out of love after they have had children, right? And so this is a big question. Do you kind of sacrifice your own happiness for the sake of the family to keep it all together, for the sake of your children or your other people in the family? Or do you leave, right, and seek out some sort of personal pleasure? Now, there is a third option, which is a little bit harder to find sometimes, but is to, you know, fix the thing that is making you unhappy. That's not always possible, though. So this is like, you know, a major question, right, is what do you do in that situation if you feel like your duty and your happiness are at odds with each other? One thing I want to emphasize in this system, maybe you already guessed this, but you know, just like the caste system, there's sort of a top to bottom hierarchy. There's a hierarchy here too. And so when these come into conflict with each other, just like Jessica, the example she gave was perfect. Duty is the most important one, according to this, right? Obviously, you don't have to take this into your own life. But if you have a conflict with your partner and you're unhappy in the marriage, what are you supposed to do? Stay in the marriage, right? According to this. And of course, according to old Catholic society, really traditional society all over the world, you make a promise, you keep your promise, right? That's your duty. And so obviously we don't live in that sort of society now. Yeah, just like I was saying, to stay, right? To keep
Yeah,
your duty to your partner. You have more, Jessica? Go ahead.
I was gonna say I kind of agree with that because like I know like in a Catholic church or like Christian, if you're Christian or Catholic, if you get married in a church, you're only getting married once there. Like you can't get married again because they have this like idea that you can only be married once and like you have to have the same husband for the rest of your life. So like if that marriage was to fail and you get a divorce and you want to get married again, you can't get married in the church anymore.
Yeah, and you know, like wars were fought over this, right? What's his name? Henry VIII. Didn't he want to get a bunch of divorces? Isn't that famous story, where basically he converted England away from Catholicism and toward Protestantism because the reasons that Jessica was just saying, right? Because he could kind of go back on his vow to stay with his various wives. Um, Maybe one question is, does this make sense? Do you agree with this order, putting duty above success and success above pleasure? Is that a good way to live your life, or do you feel like there are problems with that way of living your life? You guys are very conservative and very non-argumentative, because I feel like the point that Jessica expressed is, again, more common in what we might call traditional society. But it's important to point out, too, many people enter into some very bad situations because of these sorts of rules, right? We talked about the caste system. We talked about exploitation under the caste system. And which one is the most operative in the caste system is duty, which of course is the one at the top, right? So a lot of people have been put through hard times because of duty. If we apply this to the United States, right, we could talk about enslaved people and the various duties that were piled upon them. To say that their duty is above their pleasure is again keeping them trapped in enslavement, right? And so it's something to think about, is who decides your duty, right? This is actually maybe the most important question as we explore these topics. So, okay, we're out of time. We're in fact over time. So why don't we call it a day? Any last questions? We all good? Okay, so more excitement next time. Nice talking with you.